Hello, governor. I'm just messing with you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Jabbering Jake Podcast, you crazy cats. And yes, you are crazy, and let me explain why. First of all, I'm crazy, right? I'm crazy because I'm sitting here rambling uh, by myself in my closet. Although, to me, I'm not really doing that because I'm imagining that I'm talking to you guys and gals and um, whatever you identify as. But so I'm crazy because I'm doing that, and I'm rambling on about utter nonsense sometimes. And you are crazy because you are deciding to listen to it. But here's the thing, that is awesome, right? That's awesome. We want to be crazy because I would rather live a crazy life than a boring one. Now, I've spent this much time talking about how we're both crazy, and that's beautiful, when I should have immediately done some damage control on that horribly executed and stereotypical uh, attempt at a British greeting at the top of the show, which is not how any British person that I've ever known or heard, except if they're an archetype or a stereotype or a meme or something, do. I should have apologized and addressed that first. But we're kind of, I wouldn't be so pretentious as to call this a comedy podcast. I'm certainly no comedian, but it was a lighthearted, fun joke, because the theme, I think, of this episode is going to be rather British. That's the mood I'm in for this episode, and I think there's a few reasons for that. One is, that I have quite a few friends, or at least I'd like to think or hope that that they're my friends. I have quite a few friends from the UK. One of them being my roommate from university one year, Prashant. He's from the UK, and so I spent a year living with this guy and becoming his friend and getting to hang out with him and learn some interesting, cool things about the UK, as well as the Czech Republic too, because he's also part Czech, which is cool. But then I have some more friends recently that I met through this Japan tutoring opportunity that I've been participating in here and there lately. There's several other tutors from the UK, and also a lot of the YouTube channels that I watch on YouTube have British hosts or presenters or whatever. And lastly, watched a couple movies recently that, the characters were British. So, yeah, that's why we're feeling quite British this episode. And I've told some of the people I know before, but I'm also thinking about moving to the UK for a little bit one day, thanks to some visas that are available to me. And here's the cool thing about working from home, working remotely like I can with my software developer job, is I'm able to keep the same job and move somewhere else, barring some logistical, clerical sort of stuff, like obviously, figuring out tax stuff and all that. But that's a cool thing, and I definitely like to, if I can, give it a shot someday. Go live over there, even if just for a little bit. Experience more of the world, broaden my horizons, as it were. So, I was talking to Prashant, telling him that I was thinking about that, and just asking for some recommendations on places where he would recommend living. And he gave me some recommendations. And if you know me, I'm not from the big city. I like the big city. It's grown on me, right? It was overwhelming and a bit much at first when I first started studying in Montreal. It's a big city. I grew up in a town at first that had like 500 people. Probably 400 of them were over the age of 60. And then another 80 of them were cows in fields that were over the age of 60. Other than that, it was cornfields and woods and fields and rolling hills. After that, I've lived in places with like maybe closer to 5,000 people, which, of course, to me, coming from where I was before, I'm like, wow, that's a lot. But compared to a city like Montreal or New York or Boston or Tokyo or something like that, it's like, oh yeah, that's like the wilderness. That's the middle of nowhere, right? Heck, even somebody in like a city like Tokyo or London hears I went to school in Montreal and is like, oh, so you went to school in a small city. I'm like, what? Wait, really? That's a small city? That's huge to me. And so that's why, I want to get out there and explore the world more and broaden my horizons and see some things. So I talked to Prashant about some places, and, I told him, yeah, rural-ish or rural, definitely is my preference, with easy enough access to the city, like if I wanted to go visit London, because obviously I'm going to want to, because, want to experience everything, and it's London. So he was giving me some suggestions, one place being, this town called Newcastle, for example, and I wanted to gather some more opinions, hear what other people think as well, so I was sharing this idea with some of my friends that I recently met in this Japan thing. And I was telling one of them, I was like, oh yeah, they're like, okay, so what are some places you're thinking about now? And I mentioned, oh yeah, like, one of the places I'm looking at is Newcastle. And they literally said, ew, like, really? Kind of jokingly, like, not like a legitimate, like, ew, gross, like, that's disgusting, but like a, ew, like, I don't know, really? Like, aren't you thinking about... And I was like, yeah, I'm keeping an open mind about it. Like, sure, I'll take those suggestions as well. And it was funny. I was just talking to another one of them later, asking for suggestions and stuff. And it was like, yeah, I mentioned one place, and the person I mentioned that to said, ew. And that's when I learned that England or the UK has like a a sort of a north-south thing, like a jokey little sort of rivalry, or like a jokey little, kind of like, well, I thought, kind of like in the U.S., the way the North and the South look at each other. It's, all in good fun, kind of laughing and poking fun at each other. Maybe not in good fun to some people, but certainly in good fun to me. And I think generally the stereotypes about the regional differences in the UK are kind of inverted to what they are in America. So in America, what people think of with the North is how they think of the South in the UK, and vice versa. And I never knew anything like that, and that was kind of funny and interesting to learn. And if you think about it, like, of course, different countries have their regional differences. You look at Japan, the difference between the people in the North and the people in the South. None of this is from firsthand experience, so it's all out of pocket stuff I've heard. So take it with a grain of salt. But, I hear generally the people like in the south of Japan are more like sort of eccentric and outgoing, more likely to talk to you and approach foreigners and make conversation with you. And up north, they're a bit more shy and more reserved, more conservative. Maybe there is something to it, right? In the south, you got Okinawa, which is like Japan's Hawaii, basically. And when's the last time you ever met like a surfer dude from like California or Hawaii that's like not been super outgoing? It's like, "So, dude, how's it going, man? You want to shred some waves?" And so now I've just lost any potential that demographic. So we're doing great so far. We've lost any potential British listeners. We've lost any potential beach bums, surfers, what have you. even though it's all with love, all in good, the word just escaped my mind, all in good fun. But let's move on to, as I mentioned, the movies that I've been watching recently, because my brother and I watched some movies, either with dinner or after dinner or whatever, just, to wind down before bed. And one of the ones we watched last week was No Time to Die, the James Bond film, because we had seen it in theaters a while ago, and we both loved it. And we've been waiting for the longest time to be able to watch it again on a streaming platform, because, that's what happens these days with movies. They come out in theaters, and then they give it a while. They give it time. And it used to be the thing you wait for is the DVD release. And obviously DVDs are still a thing, I think. DVDs, Blu-rays and stuff. Look at how quickly Blu-ray kind of came in and out of, prominence. I mean, it's like DVD, you had, obviously, cassette tapes, VHS tapes. And then, those were kind of around for a while. It's the rate at which technology is evolving, really, if you think about it, because technology keeps evolving faster and faster and faster. And even though Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, two people way smarter than me, are saying that AI is something to be afraid of, I don't know about that, even though technology is getting better and better at a faster and faster rate. But that's the thing, right? I think maybe that's why, is VHS tapes were kind of around for a while, right? And then you had DVDs and CDs and stuff, right? And they didn't have a lot of space on them. I mean, you look at how much data each of them could hold by nowadays standards, and it's like, it holds 8 megabytes of data. What? You can barely. I couldn't store a 5-second video filmed on my phone, or a picture taken with a high-res picture on my phone for that much. But back then, that was a lot of data. Then you had DVDs, and it seemed like Blu-rays were a thing, and then you blink, and then we're on to digital now. But we watched the movie, and we were waiting for it to be available on streaming platforms, because that's, kind of a new thing now with, cable TV and satellite TV are they're still a very big thing, but a lot of people are... Oh, hold on a second. I'm getting a call from my mother, which means... Oops. Right, so where was I? I think I was saying how we watched we watched No Time to Die in the theaters when it came out. And then we waited for it to come out on a streaming service. And actually, I think it was on Amazon Prime for a while, but it costs extra money. But recently, it became included with Prime. So last week, my brother and I decided to watch No Time to Die. So just a heads up, there's definitely going to be spoilers for No Time to Die. So if you haven't seen it, which, you've had a bit of time to see it by now, but if you haven't seen it, you may not want to keep listening on. But, we watched No Time to Die, which was Daniel Craig's last film as James Bond, which is kind of crazy to think about, because most people say it's kind of a thing you remember from a part of your life, right? Daniel Craig has been James Bond, I think, for the entirety that I've been alive. Maybe not quite, but certainly for as long as I can remember. And it's people saying oh yeah, Sean Connery Bond was a big era of my life or whatever, or Pierce Brosnan or any of the other guys. It's kind of interesting to see who's going to be next, because my phone, I'll get these news articles sent to me in my notifications about stuff that it hears me talk about, and so it hears me talk about James Bond stuff a lot, and so now I get news articles all the time, and it's just my brother and I said yeah dude, they're just playing games. It's this, the polls are saying this person's ahead now, and this person's out of it now. For sure, there's no getting back into it now. And So it's like, bro, just stop playing games with us. Like waving, like you're waving a carrot in front of us or whatever. But anyway, so that's that. Oh man, my brother said something the other day that I totally agreed with, and I forgot to write it down. That's the thing. Things happen, and you're like, oh, I gotta write that down. That would be a great thing to talk about, and then you forget about it. Just like, just little things here and there, little bits or whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'll think of it later. Maybe I won't. But not important. We'll talk about the movie. So, in this movie, right? Okay. Bond becomes a dad. And the little girl that, is his daughter is like, I got thinking like, man, I said, man, that poor kid is going to be so fucked up when they get older. 'Cause like, I just feel like being in a production like that at that young an age, like maybe hardly old enough to understand really what was going on. I feel like that's the type of stuff that messes with you as you get older. Because you don't live a normal life. I mean, we almost don't live a normal life being a normal person. But like, I don't know. I could be talking out of my ass. Like, what do I know, right? But I feel like more often than not, kids that have been involved in productions like that early, just have such a hard time later on in life. Because maybe they don't have the guiding hand to help them through like how to get about in the real world or whatever. But, so yeah, Bond's a dad in this one. And the villain... So the villain for a lot of the Bond movies, even over the years, was this enigmatic, sort of mysterious Ernst Stavro Blofeld behind the organization Spectre, right? And it's kind of this big thing that builds up. And in the movie Spectre, the movie that came before this one, Bond gets Blofeld in prison. And then in this one, every single member of Spectre, including Blofeld, dies. So it's like they're all gone, and who will be the villain to replace them, right? And so you're watching. At the beginning of the movie, they're all still alive, right? Bond is on his honeymoon with his new wife. He's retired again, and they're in Italy, and he goes to visit the grave of one of his previous either fiance or wife or whatever, Vesper Lind, and goes to the grave and boom, explodes, and a bunch of Spectre agents show up and try to kill him. And I will say that explosion legitimately made me jump out of my seat in the theater. I wasn't expecting it. And my brother even brought that up when we were watching it. He's like, yeah, that explosion really got you. And so he goes through and basically, he escapes alive. He basically is suspicious of his wife. What the heck was her name? I can't believe I forgot it. The daughter's name was Mathilde. Well, anyway, he basically has trust issues because he's a spy and everyone's always been trying to kill him. So, and his wife is the daughter of a former Spectre agent. Well, he was a Spectre agent until death, I think, but he died. But, so he kind of sends her away, both maybe for her safety a little bit and for his. And kind of looking back, it's like, oh yeah, so she was probably pregnant then, because then it was a few years later. They don't see each other for quite a few years. And Bond's trying to figure out what's going on. And it turns out there's this weapon, like nanobots, that is made to look like this disease that you can basically program your target's DNA into. And so Bond, later on in the movie, gets lured into what's supposed to be a trap for him, looking like a mission to help with the CIA, which the CIA didn't trap him, but it just happened to be they were ready with a trap. and kills all the Spectre agents instead. Lucky for Bond, otherwise it would have been a very short movie. And wipes out all the Spectre agents and later gets Blofeld. And I'm not exactly sure what the point of me saying that was. What it was going to go into my next point. But the thing, basically, Bond sort of gets back in the game. But while he and his wife are apart, she's like a therapist or whatever, and this client shows up in her office, and they're like, oh, this one's a weird one, or this one's a strange one, or whatever. She's like, oh, you can't say that, they all have their problems. But he shows up, and it's, as we find out later, the villain of the movie, played by Rami Malek, or I don't know if I'm saying his name right. And he definitely, I'm about to say something that's probably totally not true, because I think I've literally seen one, maybe two movies that he's in. He always seems to be like the perfect sort of guy to play like that creepy sort of like villain that kind of makes your skin crawl a little bit. And I can't remember a single other movie I've seen him in. I'm sure there's one where he's just like a totally normal, like regular guy. But so he shows up in the therapist's office, obviously not there for a therapy appointment, but to kind of be like, hey, because in the beginning of the movie we see like a flashback to when, Bond's wife was a little girl, and he shows up and basically kills her mother and saves her life because she falls through the ice into a lake, and he was going to kill her, but for some reason he spared her life and saved her, and he basically comes back to be like, time to pay up. And so he shows up and he's all quiet and stuff, and he's twirling around a strand of her hair, which we find out later in the movie is an important detail, because remember, this disease targets DNA. And so he shows up and he sees this, flower that she just has in the corner of her office. And, a flower that nobody would probably have necessarily noticed. I mean, there's all these things I'm starting to notice watching movies back, these little, that's an obvious thing, but things movies do, little subtle cinematography type stuff that like all these choices directors make. Who knew it? That every choice in a movie has a purpose, like the pauses or the camera angles of the movie or whatever, the lines, the dialogue. But he talks about this flower, and this is so like the type of villain that would talk about a flower and be like, oh, that beautiful flower you have in the corner of your office, if you eat it, it's poisonous and it will kill you in 5 minutes by paralyzing your lungs. Like, that's the type of villain this guy was. And of course we learn later on that his family, who had all been killed by this woman's father, his family owned like this island that was used during World War II by like the Russians and the Japanese or something. And it was like basically an island where they grew different poisonous flowers and made different bioweapons. And it was taken by Spectre, and he gets it back, basically. And so there's your villain. And so, yeah, in the beginning of the movie, right, it's Spectre going after Bond. And by the way, let me just say this. I don't know if it's necessarily true, right, or always true, but like the first action sequence in a movie always seems to be the best, even though maybe it's not always. But like the opening action scenes in movies go hard. Like in this one, when he's running away from Spectre, when they like were trying to kill him. And that's also when I noticed in like this moment, because it was so masterfully crafted, right? You have action, and then you have this tense like moment where shit's about to go down. And in that slow moment, like we're sitting in the car and we look into Daniel Craig's eyes, and either they put some effort into this post-processing, or that guy has the bluest eyes I've ever seen. Like as if he was like one of those blue characters from the Avatar movies. You know what I'm saying? Like his eyes were so blue, like almost glowing, like a fantasy character's. And then, he turns on the machine guns on his car and gets out of a jam. But Um, you know, Spectre's chasing him in the beginning, and then later in the movie, it's this new villains guys, and he's like literally in the wilderness in Norway, and he's like run away and he drives into like a open field and like woods, and they had a whole squad of trucks and like a helicopter. Like, are you telling me they were just ready, sitting there with it? But I mean, all the action scenes were pretty awesome in this movie. And here's the other thing, right? You know how Bond 007, he's got the license to kill, right? Dude, not only does this guy have the license to kill physically, like literally has the license to kill, I think he has a license to kill people emotionally, dude. Like, after he retired, there's this new 007, right? And she's like acting all smug about it and stuff. And, people were calling her 007. And she just says, like, oh, that must bother you, kind of like trying to get under her skin. And they're walking back into the office, and Bond, basically M, right, the head of MI6 there, they get outside his door, and they're talking to Miss Moneypenny, the secretary, and she's like, oh, M would like to talk with you, talking to Bond. And so he goes to walk in, and the new 007 goes to walk in with him, and Moneypenny's like, oh, alone, actually. And he turns around and says, that must bother you. Oh! That must have... Dude, he killed her, dude, emotionally. Like, the one-liners. Insane. And so, like... he's got a license to kill, physically and emotionally. And of course he has a discussion with Emmy, like, what have you done? You've made this virus that's gonna kill everyone in the fucking world now, because the bad guy got his hands on it. And so Bond's back in the game, out of retirement again, because of course. And so he's not back in the game right away yet. He's kind of he's kind of got to go rogue and get some more information. So he goes to visit Q, the new Q. They replaced a lot of, they replaced M. Used to be Judi Dench, and they replaced Moneypenny, and they replaced Q. So he goes to see the new Q, who's at his house, cooking dinner and stuff, presumably for his date that's coming over. And dude, Q is he's the most British guy ever. I mean, he's in, like Bond's trying to convince him to like look at this like USB drive or whatever that Bond got a hold of, and he's like trying to be like, get out of my house and stuff like that, or get out of my flat. And he talks to him, and he finally manages to convince him. And this is why he's one of the most British people. I mean, there were so many things, but he finally manages to convince him, and he's like, well, guess it's never 9 to 5, is it? And it's like, I know that's a very British thing, because in America, you wouldn't say that. It'd be like, dude, like, you owe me big time. Like, you're making me work overtime, dude. Like, oh, come on, I'm off the clock, dude. It's my day off or whatever, right? But he's just like, well, it's never 9 to 5, is it? And he gives him that flash drive, and he has like a computer just sitting there in his house, ready, like as if he needs to always be ready to hack into something, dude. Like if someone were to break in and be like, oi, better hack something in the next 5 fucking seconds or else I'm going to kill your whole family. And he's like, all right, hold on. And he, ding, 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 ding. And all of a sudden the guy's phone is like berating him, about how untidy he is and how, he's not married yet and stuff like that. And it's like his Google Assistant or whatever yelling at him, the one where you got to be like, okay, Google, how do I get blood stains out of hardwood? And you're welcome to anybody that has a Google that I just triggered. Now that's in your search history. But here's the thing. If you're a butcher, maybe you have your own butcher shop in a log cabin, you're fine. You have an alibi. But so he says that, and he has a hacking computer ready, and he finds the information that basically says, like, oh, he has, it's like database of all this DNA like in the world, and they could use this to really mess some people up, millions and millions of people. And so, Bond is back in the game to shut down this whole thing, and there's this nice cheesy friendly moment between Bond and the new 007, and she's like, "Sir, permission to redesignate Bond as 007." And it was all, cheesy, but nice, but cheesy. And so they go take this guy on, and of course they tragic twist at the end, right before Bond, ices the guy, is he manages to infect Bond with this disease that isn't going to kill him, but anyone close to him, like his wife and his child. Like if he wanted to, he can never touch them, or else they'll get sick and die like instantly. It's like worse than if he just killed Bond type thing, And basically Bond's like, "Listen, we need to send like ballistic missiles on this place to destroy this facility. We can't let this disease, these nanobots get out to the world." And it's this big sad ending where Bond doesn't make it off the island, and he, has this heartfelt moment talking to his wife and saying how beautiful, their daughter was, and he was happy that he got to spend the time with her. And of course, earlier when she meets them in the movie and sees that there's a kid, she's like, "Oh no, it's not yours," which obviously it was. But because he had basically kicked her out of his life, right? Because suspicion or whatever. So of course she was mad at him. But at the end it's like, she does have your eyes. Those really, really blue eyes that are like so blue that they like glow, like they're like reflect, like they light up the sky. That's why the sky's blue. And he's like, "I know, darling." And then, the missiles come down. Dude, Hans Zimmer was the composer for this music. Oh my God, that music had me tearing up that moment both times I watched it. And my brother was like talking to me as it was happening. I was like trying not to talk too much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It's okay to cry. But then recently this week, we also watched the Sherlock Holmes movies, and you know what? I don't want to snuff these movies because we're over the 30-minute mark, and I already talked about Bond, and maybe I'd have enough to talk about this movie for a whole other episode as well. But you know what? We're just gonna keep it going, and you're gonna get an extra long bonus episode this time. So, you're welcome, or I'm sorry, either one. But we watched Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. And, I love these movies so much. They were movies I watched a while ago, when I was younger. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, you got to see that series, Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch." And I'm sure he's great. I've never watched it. I'm sorry, you're not going to tell me that, like, Robert Downey Jr., like, Sherlock Holmes is not the best. Like, he's amazing. Amazing, dude. I love those movies. We watched both of them back to back on the same night. We had the time, and we watched them, and it's just it's got a good blend of like mystery and action and humor. The premise of it, right? And of course, I've never read the Sherlock Holmes book, so I don't know the story behind it. Just kind of like I never read any of the Bond books, but it's like, he's this really smart like detective. But also, he can whoop some ass. Like, okay, Watson, I get it, right? Because they explain how he was a military man. Like, he was in the military and stuff like that. And he's a doctor, too. So he probably knows, like, swing at somebody with his fingers and hit a pressure point and they just drop dead all of a sudden, right? And like, he's a rugby lad and stuff like that. I get why he's, he can whoop some ass. I don't get why Sherlock Holmes... Is it like, was he in a boxing club or something, like when he was in school or something? Or like, I mean, I'm not talking about like, one-on-one fight. Maybe the guy's a little smaller than him or something. I'm talking like ambush, like outnumbered 4-1. And he's all like, these cool sequences that I love where it's like, sort of freeze frame and he's like planning it out like a game of chess. He's like, first, body shot to the ribs, duck to the left. Then, opponent has weakness in his right ear because of the way he's leaning. So I hit his ear, and just like goes through the sequence, in slow mo, so you can see what's happening. And then it happens, and it's like that was so badass, you know. But maybe there's something I'm missing where it like explains why Sherlock Holmes is able to whoop people's asses. Maybe. But so yeah, so we watched them, and Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law are such good actors. Like it's, it's great. And something my brother said, he's like, the thing about, right, like Robert Downey Jr. and Johnny Depp, he's like, and his character like Jack Sparrow, he's like, I feel like you could swap them and they would both do a great job in each other's roles. And I thought about it for a second. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Actually, I think you're right. But I remember something I said right off the bat was that, dude, for a second I was like, dude, it kind of looks weird seeing Robert Downey Jr. without his like Tony Stark like facial hair, right? Like, because obviously Tony Stark and Iron Man was a big part that he did, in the Marvel movies. And in Sherlock Holmes, he didn't have like that facial hair there, and it like, it was, for a second, it was like a shock. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. But it was such a good movie, dude. And like watching it back and seeing all like the foreshadowing and things here and there, like it's so cool seeing all these subtle little things that they like foreshadow, or things that you might miss if you're not looking out for it. Sorry, the longer I'm in here, the hotter it gets, And fun fact, again, this is the second episode in a row I'm recording. But, the first movie, right, they're going after this guy, Lord Blackwood, who had been, basically executed for, like, black magic and stuff like that. And then he rises from the dead and continues, and he has this grand plan that he, he basically he's going to eliminate Parliament, and basically take over and have them go invade America again, because it was, their rightful colony or whatever. And he does it all under the guise of like magic, even though it's all science and stuff, and it's really cool. But there's these cool little things, like obviously before the second movie came out too, right? Like you're watching it and it's like there's this one point where Sherlock Holmes comes across this mysterious figure who we don't see his face, right? And he's like this sort of shadowy figure with this grand plan, who turns out to be Professor James Moriarty, which I'm pretty sure, like, if you've read the Sherlock Holmes books, kind of like a James Bond thing with like this sort of rival that Sherlock Holmes is actually in this long play, like, battle with, like, for a long time, except in Sherlock Holmes, in these Robert Downey movies, it's a much shorter arc, but it's like we're introduced to him pretty early on in the first movie, and it's so cool. Like if you watch them, especially if you watch them back to back, you realize it's kind of like this long epic like saga where like the first movie leads into the second, because it does, right? But it's just so cool. And I mean the dynamic too between Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law is so good. Like it works so well. And let me say this too, the Watson, Jude Law's character Watson in those movies. Okay, I've talked about some guys with amazing mustaches that I would love to have, but this guy has a realistic mustache. I'm like, that is an amazing mustache and realistic, and I'd love to have a mustache like that. And I think I'm close to being able to grow one like that, except in the middle it's still a little thin. But I bet I could grow one like that. It would look pretty good on me. Maybe when I get a little bit more in shape, He was kind of like this skinny, like, very, good physique, like soldier. He was a soldier, right? And, he had a good mustache. But, so moving on to the second movie, right? Because the first movie's great, but I think I like the second movie even a little bit better. And part of that, too, is I love a movie where you're on a journey, right? And they do a lot of traveling in in that second movie, because Moriarty's kind of pulling strings across different countries, all these things behind the scenes like bombings and assassinations and stuff like that. So they're traveling on trains going through different countries in Europe and stuff. And at the beginning of the movie, right, Watson had gotten married and he was going on taking a train to go to his honeymoon with his wife. And Holmes had met with Moriarty and was like, hey, listen, leave Watson out of this. And he's like, nah, get fucked. So, of course, Holmes is like, well, he's going to try and kill him, so I've got to save my boy. Even though my boy said, all right, yeah, I'm done, I'm out of the life, right? I want to spend the rest of my life, with my new wife, not chasing all these mysteries. But Holmes goes onto the train, right? Disguised as a woman at first. And, I love it. I mean, you sort of learn why afterwards, in some flashbacks and stuff. But Holmes is in the hallway by the bathroom on the train, and the guy's like, "Oh, sorry, madam, can't use the lavatory while the train's in the station." And then the train pulls away like 2 seconds later, and it's like, "Oh, you all good now?" But also, why? I don't get that. Why can't you use the bathroom on the train while it's at the station? Literally, why? I don't get it. So what are you expecting to run out into the station, use the bathroom, and hope that you make your train or whatever? But so then that happened, and of course, the assassins start to attack Watson and stuff, and then Holmes shows up and helps and pushes Watson's wife Mary out of the train to safety, and into a river below where his brother picks her up and keeps her safe so that she's not going to get killed. But so they're fighting these guys on the train, and dude, sometimes watching that movie, and again, this is because I'm an American and I know, as much as I do know about British people, I still know very little, right? So this is just from my perspective. But Robert Downey Jr. is so good at being British, I feel like maybe, that sometimes I feel like I forgot that he's not actually English, He's not actually English, he's just playing a character. And it's funny because they're in this tense, stressful, high action situation, right? And he's just saying the most English things ever. I know I've been saying British a lot, and people from the UK might roast me a bit for that if any of them listen to this, because British, I think, is a less precise way. Obviously British kind of refers to, you could be English, you could be Scottish, you could be Irish, you could be Welsh, right? It's a very blanket term for referring to them. But so he's just says some of the most English things while they're in the middle of this high intensity situation, right? Watson's yelling at him, did you just kill my wife? Blah, 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 blah. And he's like, of course not. And then he's like, now, shall we crack on then? And then goes out on, they're sidling along the outside of the train and going along and stuff. And then Watson's still yelling at him. And he's like, I told you she's safe, blah, blah, blah. Or he's like, why did you bring them to us? And he's like, they weren't here for me, they were here for you. And he's like, now mind the door. I'm sorry, I know it's silly and stupid, but I just love these English expressions. I sometimes use them unironically in my everyday life, or sometimes ironically to see how people react. But so then they're going out, throughout the rest of the movie, and I remember there's this one part where Holmes discovers a secret passage for them to escape. They met with this Roma lady, I think is the actual term for them. Obviously the derogatory term for them is gypsies, but her brother is involved in this big political scheme that Moriarty's got going. And so, her brother was part of this group of revolutionaries that was making bombs and stuff, and that's why Moriarty was using them. So they go to one of their hideouts and talk to this guy there to try to figure out their plan. And then, some goons are coming down to try and get them, and Holmes discovers this secret passageway that's hidden in the wall somewhere, and and figures out how to get into it. My brother's like, that's so far-fetched, bro. And I'm like, not really, though. It's like in the first movie when Holmes discovered this secret, like, glass needle Blackwood almost used to kill Watson. He's like, I saw it because I was looking for it. And I said, they know they went to this revolutionary headquarters. You figure that they're going to need, have a plan B to escape, right? And so he's probably looking for it. And then, like, he saw, the handle they used to get in is not dusty where the others are. So he goes through it. But, yeah. And then it was another movie, they go and they thwart the plan and stuff. But then, it's one of those where you're led to believe that Holmes dies at the end. And then obviously, or not obviously, but at the end he sort of appears. Of course, Watson and stuff still think he's dead, and he's still alive, as if there's supposed to be a next movie, which there still isn't. But it's just, I know this has been a shit show of a review, and I've kind of been all over the place and stuff like that, just kind of summarizing the movie, making some jokes here and there. But I just really enjoyed it, and that's what this podcast is about. Just kind of jabbering on about what's on my mind that week. So if it's not always in this big cohesive scripted outline thing, because I didn't make outlines for these last couple episodes, well, then I guess, hopefully I don't think I would get copyright strike for that. I mean, it's not, but if I do get copyright strike for using this oops button too much, well, then I guess worth it, though, and I'm doing it because I'm a fan of the person who made the product. But if it turns out to be a bit of a rambling thing, well, that's okay. That's the beauty of this podcast, and we're gonna get better. And it keeps you on your toes. You don't know what to expect from episode to episode, unless we use some of the segments that y'all have given me, suggested to me in the feedback for this podcast, which maybe by the time this episode has come out, you will have released some. And we'll try and maybe do some segments here and there and have some guests on every once in a while. But this has just been kind of a rambling, throw some jokes in here and there. Maybe I will be, a bit of a comedian one day, not like a professional comedian as like a job or something, or, that's just, I wouldn't, I'd never want to be like famous, or anything like that. Like that'd just be too much of a hassle. But, maybe I'll be a comedy, comedian. Can't talk. It's getting too late. But, there's a bit of a ramble, bit of some jokes here and there, bit of summarizing some movies. Maybe this will be your movie review podcast. It won't, but maybe it could be, but it couldn't, and it won't. But it's just going to be whatever I want to talk about. And so we're at the, 48-ish minute mark. So there we go. Oh, 1.5 something, 1.6 something length episode. Because that's where the vibe was at this week. A little bit of an extra long episode. So there you go. And hopefully, maybe it's a you're welcome, or maybe it's a sorry. Maybe you didn't want to listen for this long, but if you did, or even if you didn't, even if you just listened for a little bit, thank you so much for the support. It really does mean a lot to see that people are interested in watching this. And thank you for your continued support. If you like it, keep listening. Like it, rate it, review it, leave comments, leave likes, and probably most importantly of all, share it, spread it around with people, tell people about it, write letters to people, send carrier pigeon or Pony Express letters that hopefully people don't send to their spam folder. Email people about it. That's a throwback to the last episode. So if you're a real fan, you'll get the reference. But in addition to this oops button too, I'd love to add like a soundboard in, right? At some point, get some sound effects, maybe with some silly like one-liners I said that stuck or something like that. Once we start getting more engagement and see what people riff on. And eventually, like I said, I'd love to have like an art contest to see people maybe design a new cover photo for this podcast, and maybe some music for like intro and outro segments. But got off on a tangent again. Now we're almost at the 50-minute mark. You're probably not still listening at this point because you thought we were wrapping it up. But if you have been, or even if you haven't been listening this long, thank you for the continued support. Remember to like and share and rate it. And I'll see you next time. Have a good day. Bye.